Chlöe Swarbrick.
Mr. Speaker, the Greens want every New Zealander to feel proud of our country. Not just for our history, for granting women the right to vote, standing against the United States for a nuclear-free Pacific, splitting the atom. We want New Zealanders to feel proud of our country that they live in today. We want New Zealanders to be able to swim in their rivers, to be able to grow food and healthy soil, to catch abundant fish from our ocean to feed their families, to be able to afford their groceries, to be housed, to heat their homes, to have the right to a good education and a secure job, to innovate, to create, to have fun. We want New Zealanders to be happy, healthy and safe, unified. But Mr. Speaker, this government is telling us computer says no. Today they have released a budget which tells us that they have no hope, no plan, no ambition and no vision for this country. Unless, of course, that hope, that vision and that plan is just what we see here, allowing corporations to profit handsomely off the misery of regular New Zealanders, subsidising and supporting the very fossil fuels that Treasury's BFU tells us are the major vulnerability in our economy. This is not a cost of living crisis, it is a cost of greed crisis. So Christopher Luxon and Nicola Willis, aren't you sick of pretending that there is no money? Because the National Party can find money when it wants to. And I'm not just talking about their rich listed donations. In the last 2 years, they have found billions in their budgets in the tax cuts for landlords, tobacco companies, and the wealthy and sorted. There has been billions for fossil fuel production, billions and billions to meet Trump's request to spend up large on new military equipment. So they've taken billions and billions from the poorest New Zealanders, cutting access for the homeless to emergency housing and cutting access to benefits, while thousands of New Zealanders are being pushed out of their jobs by this same government to the highest number since 1994. The year that I was born, Mr. Speaker. And the books today show us that unemployment will in fact be higher in the next few years as a result of the decisions that this government was just clapping for than were forecast in December. That means another 6,500 New Zealanders will lose their jobs thanks to the decisions of Christopher Luxon. These books show us that Christopher Luxon's responsible fiscal management has resulted in further downward revisions of GDP growth forecasts. Treasury today has also warned that his obsession with fossil fuels will raise costs for households and for businesses, which can slow spending, investment, and the very growth that they love to crow about, ultimately reshaping our economy's structure and lowering our output and economic performance. It's dressed up in a heck of a lot of fancy language, but today the government is effectively choosing where our collective resources will go and who gets to be in charge of this country, who really gets to make decisions. And throughout this week, Christopher Luxon has shown us, albeit being dragged kicking and screaming into broad daylight, as to who he sees it is his job to serve. We have seen laws stripping people's right to hold big polluters accountable, originally actually drafted by the country's largest polluters, Fonterra and Z Energy, introduced by this government with glee. And the Greens have exposed that the government is taking on an extra $1.5 billion more in debt in order to try and quietly cover the tracks of their failed climate policies. Mr. Speaker, this is why it is so important to understand that every time that this government makes decisions to push more of our country's wealth up to the top, they are also damaging our democracy. Fewer and fewer people get less and less money and less influence, while more and more people are being left with scraps that they are being told to fight over. Those regular people are being told to not look up. So let's run through some important facts, because despite this government's best efforts to starve our economy, New Zealanders are slugging away and working hard, and we have been lucky with global commodity prices. So our economy is growing in size. But more and more people are getting poorer and poorer, and the government is cutting away investment in our basic collectively owned and operated public services. So our economy is growing, but regular people are getting poorer, and our government is shrinking while taking on more debt. So where is New Zealanders' money going? Well, just last year, the 100-odd households on NBR's rich list increased their wealth by almost $8 billion in 1 year. Supermarkets are making $1 million a day in documented excess profit. Power companies' net profit were $457 million in just the second half of last year. Banks raked in profits of almost $7 billion in 2025. That is $1,248 in profit for Australian banks for every single New Zealander. But our economy is worth $445 billion. It's actually bigger than it's ever been. Yet our hospitals and our schools and our nurses and our doctors and our teachers who staff them are struggling. Our firefighters are striking twice a week because the fire trucks meant to save lives are falling apart. But those public services don't fail overnight. When we don't invest in them properly, those services get slower, more stretched, and further away with every year that passes. And there's a word for that: austerity. It is how you break a country in slow motion. This government is boasting today about new money for health and education. But once you actually count inflation, a growing and ageing population, and what it really costs to deliver these things, much of that record investment is actually a cut in everything but name. This government, Mr. Speaker, will do anything in order to avoid taxing the mega rich. They'll take our school kids' lunch money. They've made real-term cuts to our schools and to early childhood education, meaning higher fees for parents. They have cut $300,000 from programs that help New Zealanders with energy hardship when record numbers are struggling to pay their power bill. They have raided millions of dollars from food banks and taken away almost $700 million from public housing tenants. I guess just some of us are entitled to our entitlements. Their decisions will close down sexual violence prevention services. Christopher Luxon promises growth means more money in our economy. And actually, he is right about that. But what he's not being straight up and honest about is that he knows that that growth is not being shared. He knows that under his economic rules, that wealth goes straight to the top. But maybe I'm being too generous. Maybe he actually truly does still believe in trickle-down economics, just like some believe in the tooth fairy. Maybe he believes his own shtick about hard choices as he entrenches an economy that has been designated as a speculator's tax haven by Australians. The same Australians from the same Australia where higher tax rates on those who can afford to pay means that there is the government revenue necessary to invest in better public services and infrastructure. The same Australia that this government is sending so many of our best and brightest to. Because under this government, New Zealanders are having a really hard time imagining a better tomorrow here at home. Look, I know politics is hard. I know that changing your mind and doing something differently in this environment of all places opens you up to all kinds of attacks, that you're U-turning or backtracking or whatever we want to call it. But I would like to think, if I was privileged enough to be sitting in those seats over there, making decisions about where our country's collective resources are used, if I had spent 2 years making decisions that were hurting regular people, I'd like to think that I would pause and reevaluate, Mr. Peters, that I would listen to the chanting of the emergency service workers on strike for the longest industrial action in a generation, to the cries of babies that this government knows are being born into unnecessarily, entirely preventable poverty, to the New Zealanders down at the RSC who just want some leaders with a spine. Instead, this government ploughs ahead with their economic doom loop. They've decided to mercilessly cut back on spending without any idea of how the market that they worship is going to fill the gap. That shocked business confidence that they said that they cared about. And the private sector investment also contracted by 2%. They cancelled thousands of new state builds and hundreds of infrastructure projects, which has meant the loss of 15,000 construction sector jobs. But each job lost isn't just devastating for that person and just for their family. It is devastating to the local community and to the local economy and to the small businesses where they bought a morning coffee or went on a date or did their home renos through. And what is this government's response to this doom loop of their own creation? It's not to stop and think, maybe this thing isn't working, because maybe, instead of a plan, they're running on instinct. A well-documented, well-exercised National Party instinct to hand over our collective wealth and control to a few people at the top. Former national governments have sold off state housing, which now means we hand out billions to line the pockets of private landlords. Former national governments sold off parts of our state-owned power companies despite an overwhelming referendum and opposition. And now we all pay for an energy system driven by profit at the expense of innovation and renewable generation. Former national government shut down and amalgamated ministries and departments, closing factories and putting a wrecking ball through the regions. And this national government is no different. New Zealanders deserve so much better. And the Greens have shown that better is possible. If we dared to tax multi-millionaires and billionaires so that they contributed fairly to the country that helped them to build that wealth, we wouldn't have to rely on charity to get new ambulances on the road. We could use this big old economy democratically to achieve the things that no one of us could achieve alone. Because very few people have the individual wealth to build a hospital or refurbish old classrooms, but together we have more wealth than we have ever had. We can create jobs, we can build the things that we need, we can protect the natural environment that we literally rely on for life on Earth as we know it. Or are we just going to keep pretending that megalomaniac billionaires are going to solve our problems? I actually agreed with the Prime Minister when 2 months ago, as the fossil fuel crisis was hitting, he said boldly, hope is not a plan. However, at exactly the same time, his Minister of Energy was quietly cancelling the long-awaited energy plan. The fossil fuel crisis has put a spotlight on the ticking time bomb sitting at the centre of our economy. And while Luxon's government seems intent on finding new ways to lace this time bomb into the fabric of everything that we do, as this government hopes and prays for new fossil fuel shipments, and every time one is confirmed, they just hope to restart that time bomb countdown timer. But Mr. Speaker, if that counter gets to zero, our entire country, our entire economy grinds to a halt. And it's not just sensible, it's not sensible, Mr. Winston-Peters, to spend all of our resources fixated on feeding that beast in the hopes to just reset the clock. We need to defuse the time bomb. The next step is rewiring our economy and country around something that will not blow up in our faces, because we do not get affordable, secure energy from expensive fuels that have to be hauled in from the other side of the planet. We get it when we tap into the abundant water, wind and sun, and the geothermal activity beneath our feet. We get it when we electrify everything. That is what it means to build resilience. It's what it means to insulate ourselves against imported inflation. It's what it means to build a country. But it's not just about nation building. It's common sense. It's taking control over the things that we have control over. But this government is giving up control, not to regular New Zealanders, but to corporations, to offshore shareholders and the fewer and fewer people who are getting more and more of our resources. Funnily enough, if our country was the business that Christopher Luxon seems to think it is, it would also be a failing business. Because in business, you don't succeed by firing all of your staff, cutting off your sources of revenue, and then begging rich out-of-towners to maybe pop over because they can avoid paying tax. Close your eyes to the crumbling infrastructure. If things aren't going right, you get a new business plan. You find a new strategy. But a country is not a company, and a Prime Minister is not a CEO. Prime Minister, I have spent 2 years inviting you to come and walk the streets of Auckland Central to meet the people, including the children who your policies have made homeless. I invite you to go and stand in the middle of Bendigo in central Otago and tell New Zealanders with a straight face that you want to poison the local waterways and churn out our pristine biodiversity into a mine to make a quick buck for an Australian mining company. I invite you to come and sit with me, with the regular people at Mount Smart during a Warriors game, to talk to the couple from Hamilton who sit next to me, who drive up every other week for the game, who tell me that your government has been a wrecking ball for small businesses because you've sucked all the money out of customers' pockets. Prime Minister, I invite you to go outside, to touch grass, to breathe the air, to look the New Zealanders that you are supposed to serve in the eye. Those things are real. Those things matter. And when your made-up economic rulebook is destroying those very real things, those silly rules have got to change. Mr. Speaker, here is the hardest truth. And it's actually not for the theatre that is this place. It is for the New Zealanders beyond these walls. No one is coming to save us. New Zealanders are going to have to do this for ourselves. And on November the 7th, New Zealanders can resign this government to the history books. But we are not going to spontaneously end up with a government that is willing to take on the well-resourced lobbyists in this country and to work actively in the interests of regular people. So we are going to need a new kind of coalition. I am not talking about the boring, circular, talk-back talk of which politician is going to negotiate with which. I am talking about New Zealanders coming together with a common, intentional idea about who we are as a country and where all of us want to go. Because when everything feels complicated and chaotic, I believe that we can agree on some basic things. Every New Zealander is entitled to a safe home, a good education, affordable food, a secure job, reliable transport, renewable energy. Those are the non-negotiables that every New Zealander is entitled to, and they can be the building blocks to help us rebuild our country for all of us. These are the things that we should fight for, not just for ourselves, Mr. Speaker, not just for the people who we know and love, but even for the people who we don't know and don't like. To anyone and everyone who is listening, I am asking you not just to believe in the Greens. I am asking New Zealanders to believe in themselves, to believe in each other, and to believe in the country that we can create if we are willing to work together to make it a reality. I am asking New Zealanders, though, not just to believe. I am asking them to act. Because if New Zealanders are feeling powerless right now, it's kind of by intent. That's exactly the strategy and the plan of this government, to have regular people switch off so that power and wealth gets concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. But I promise New Zealanders that they will find their power when they go out there and they talk to other New Zealanders about these basic things that we have in common, that we are willing to fight for each other. New Zealanders can do more than vote this election, Mr. Speaker. They can join the campaign to rebuild this country.
Mr. Speaker.